I remember feeling the familiar weight of my cat settling behind me. It was comforting and I was on the verge of drifting off when suddenly I felt a chill. It was strange because it was a warm day and the breeze from the window was gentle. The sensation was so unsettling that I opened my eyes and looked around. Everything seemed normal at first glance, but then I noticed something odd. The shadows in the room seemed to shift unnaturally, as if they were moving of their own accord. I tried to shake off the feeling, attributing it to my tired mind playing tricks on me. But then I heard a soft whisper, barely audible, as if carried by the wind. It was not a voice I recognized, and it sent a shiver down my spine. I sat up quickly, my heart pounding, and looked around the room, but there was nothing there. My cat was still curled up peacefully, seemingly unaware of anything amiss. I tried to calm myself, telling myself it was just my imagination, but the unease lingered. I decided to stay a little longer to enjoy those cuddles, something she often does, and even my parents have said she's a healer because she always does it in the area where there's the most pain. Since I often have migraines, she usually focuses on that area. However, for a second I found it strange because she usually does it more on my crown, and this time she seemed very focused on my nape. Perhaps I allowed it for about 5 minutes before making up my mind. With my eyes half open, I knew I had to get up for good, but at that moment, I remember seeing how my cat placed her white paw in front of my eyes. I reached to pet her, but suddenly an alarm went off inside me. Something told me I shouldn't do it, and that's when I realized two things. The first was that I couldn't move, and the second was that the thing I thought was my cat wasn't. Terrified, I realized that what initially seemed like a small lump on my nape was actually like a person hugging me from behind, but the most terrifying thing was that it was furry, as I felt its hairy arms wrapping around mine, preventing me from moving while it kept licking my nape. With that, I realized that I was starting to feel my body weaken and become more and more tired. I wanted to scream. And even more so when I saw that what seemed to be my cat's paw turned before my terrified eyes into a hand with claws. I begged my body to respond, but it wouldn't. I felt very weak, so the only thing I could think of was to pray, and I tried to do so. I tried to pray the Our Father, and although I did it in my mind, I felt my throat close up and couldn't remember the rest of the prayer. 3 times I tried to start the Our Father, and 3 times I failed. Meanwhile, that thing clung to me, licking my nape. It was at that moment that I heard the laughter of my sister and our friend. In a desperate act, I tried to shout my sister's name to ask for help. Terrified at the thought of staying like this, I remember gathering all my strength and inhaling as much air as I could to scream, "Rebecca!" That thing finally released my throat as I jumped up in bed. I was breathing heavily and felt dizzy. I looked around with my heart pounding, feeling uncomfortable in my own room for the first time, with the sensation that something was watching me. Perhaps fear made me imagine a growl in my ear as I looked at my reflection in the mirror behind my bedroom door, the one that always faced directly to my bed. The strangest thing that disoriented me even more was that while inside the room I could still see the twilight light, but upon stepping into the adjoining room, I was dazzled by the light bulb and was astonished to see through the window that it was already night. My sister and my friend looked at me and informed me that my parents were not home and that they were going out to buy dinner. I looked at them, still feeling disoriented, and asked if they hadn't heard me scream. My sister said she had heard me but thought it was nothing since I only screamed once. She reiterated that they were leaving and asked if I needed anything. Our friend, with a mocking voice, said, "We'll leave you with the old man by the window." I looked at him, frightened, and said, "Don't joke about that, I'm not in the mood for jokes." He asked what was wrong, and I told them that something had come over me and that I was trying to convince myself it had all been a dream, but my mind argued back, telling me I had been awake the whole time. My sister looked at me angrily and said, "It's because of that damn mirror. I've told you to move your bed away from it." I asked what she meant, and she replied, "Everyone knows mirrors are portals for bad things, and it's bad to have one facing where you sleep. Besides, you fell asleep with wet hair, and water is a conductor. You practically put yourself in the crosshairs of those things." I nodded, thinking it made sense, and my friend corroborated the situation, but I found it hard to believe. That mirror had been there for years, and I had almost always slept in front of it. Why now? They ended the discussion and left, leaving me alone. I went downstairs, afraid to stay near my room, and turned on all the lights. Then I noticed that my cat had appeared at some point and stayed by my side, circling me as if she wanted to protect me or sense my fear. I stayed like that, trying not to think about what had happened, convincing myself it had all been a nightmare so real that it scared me. The strangest thing is that not even 10 minutes had passed when my paternal grandmother arrived. She invited herself into the house, and the first thing she said was, "Are you okay, dear?" Something about the way she asked me set off alarms. She had recently started visiting us again after years of my uncles and grandparents seeming to hold a grudge against us. My grandfather had disowned my father, telling him he wanted nothing to do with him until he left my mother, which he never did. At that moment, for some reason, I felt a terrible distrust toward my grandmother. I didn't want to stay near her, even though she sat down and wanted to chat. I kept my distance and responded with monosyllables. It also struck me as odd that she hadn't asked about my father, because she always did that when she arrived, and if he wasn't there, she would leave. We stayed like that for a few minutes while I started to feel my body grow heavy again. My head began to throb intensely and I felt nauseous. All this told me something was wrong. I don't remember what I talked about with my grandmother. I just had an urgent feeling that she needed to leave the house. Maybe that's why my mother suddenly arrived, surprised to see my grandmother there. She chatted with her for a few minutes and then said she had to go. As soon as we were alone, my mother turned to me, and I began to tell her what had happened. I was desperate, feeling my hands tremble. She sat with me as I recounted everything that had occurred. She listened attentively, even though I kept repeating what had happened, insisting it hadn't been a dream. She was patient with me, and perhaps without fully believing me, she decided to help and asked, "Do you want me to do the egg cleansing? She's not a healer, but sometimes she gives my sister and me a quick cleanse. She uses an egg and prayers to ward off negative energy." She took me to the backyard and brought out a container of holy water she kept. She began to pray while she did this, sprinkling me from head to toe. It worked perfectly because I felt as if something was sliding off me. It was like having a layer of mud on me and taking a bath. Suddenly, I felt lighter and could even smile as the fear dissipated. I could think clearly again. I thought that would be the end of it. I even discussed it with a friend of mine who is knowledgeable about these esoteric matters. She said it might have been a witch or a spirit trying to feed off me, something quite common. She also advised me to carry an amulet at all times, and I remembered I had taken it off that day. She suggested I even bathe or sleep with it, but I should always have it with me. I should have listened. By that time, I was afraid to enter my room after dark, and although I didn't like it, I slept with the light on until my sister came in and turned it off. I avoided the mirror completely. In fact, since that day, I avoid looking at any mirror after dark because I feel that if I do, something will stare back at me. It was late at night. I was deeply asleep when suddenly, in my dreams, I felt hands closing around my throat and starting to squeeze. I began to struggle until I woke up. I realized that what I thought was a dream was actually happening. Hands were gripping my neck tightly. In my ears, I heard mocking laughter as I tried to break free. I couldn't do it because my body felt numb and heavy. I tried to pray, but like the first time, I couldn't, and it seemed that thing knew it. I remember the sensation of something leaning towards me and, in a mocking voice, saying, "You can't defeat me, I'm going to kill you." Terrified and gathering all the willpower I had, I forced my arm to reach for the amulet I had taken off to sleep. I managed to put it around my head, and when I did, the thing disappeared and I could breathe again. I looked around in the darkness, but everything seemed calm, and although I wanted to wake my sister, I was afraid to get out of bed or make any noise, so I just turned over in bed. I clung to the amulet, trying to convince myself it had all been a nightmare. The event happened a third time when, in a similar situation and in the deepest sleep, I felt someone's breath on my cheek. Suddenly, it seemed like someone shouted my name in my ear. Being the third time and unable to feel safe in my room at night, I decided to follow my friend's advice and finally didn't part with my amulet. I also spoke once more with her and another friend who had evidence, and their response was very similar. I had to sprinkle holy water in my room and get rid of the mirror, or at least cover it with a white cloth at night and sprinkle it with holy water. They also reiterated that I shouldn't take off my amulet to sleep and, obviously, move my bed away from the window because they believed it could be acting as a portal for bad things. Everything worked perfectly because after that, nothing so bad happened again, and little by little I stopped being afraid of the night and the dark. My room had become a refuge for me once again.